hands smelled like dish soap when my son called to tell me the trip was confirmed. I had just finished washing up after dinner, a habit I'd kept since my kids were small, since the house on Meadowlark Drive where we all used to pile into the kitchen after Sunday pot roast, and somebody would wash while somebody else dried and we'd argue over the radio station. That was a long time ago. Now it's just me in the kitchen, just me and the radio, and I don't argue with anyone about anything anymore. My son's voice was warm on the phone, excited even. He said, Mom, we've been planning this for months, 14 days. Nashville, Memphis, then we drive down to New Orleans. You've always talked about New Orleans. I had. I'd talked about it for 30 years. His wife got on the phone too. She said it would be wonderful to have me along. She used that word, wonderful. I remember standing there holding the dish towel against my hip and thinking, yes, yes, this is exactly what I needed. A chance to stop rattling around this house, a chance to feel like part of the family again. I started packing 3 weeks early. I should tell you a little about where things stood before this trip. My husband passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Quick and brutal, the way that kind always is. We had 41 years together, 41 years of arguments and making up and road trips and retirement planning and all the ordinary things that somehow add up to a life. When he was gone, I found out just how much of my daily shape had been defined by another person's presence. You don't know how much room someone takes up until that room is empty. My son, he's 43 now, moved to Tennessee about 6 years back for work, software something. I've never fully understood what he does, but he does it well, and he and his wife bought a nice house in Brentwood and they have 2 kids, 8 and 11, and a golden retriever named Biscuit. It's a good life, a full life. I'm proud of him. I just don't always feel like I'm part of it. I live in Ohio, Cincinnati. It's not far enough to be a real distance, but it's far enough that we don't just drop by. We schedule, we coordinate, we send cards and texts and do holidays when everyone can manage it. Last Christmas I drove down and I brought my green bean casserole and a pie from the bakery on Vine Street. And I sat at the table and passed dishes and laughed at the right moments and drove home 3 days later feeling somehow lonelier than when I'd arrived. So when my son called about New Orleans, I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We met in Nashville, I drove, they flew, and I picked them up at the airport. That was the first thing. I picked them up, which meant I rearranged the back seat and moved my overnight bag to the trunk. And when my daughter-in-law came through the arrivals door, she was already on her phone and she gestured to me like I was a bellhop and said, "Can you get the cart? There's a cart right there." I got the cart. I told myself she's tired from the flight, the kids were probably difficult on the plane, she's managing a lot. I told myself that. I've always been good at telling myself things. We loaded the luggage into my car. There was a lot of luggage, more than 14 days seemed to require, and my son clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good to see you, Mom." And I said, "Good to see you too, honey." And we got in and drove toward downtown, and that was fine. That was really fine. Nashville smelled like cut grass and rain, and the kids were kicking each other in the back seat, and I thought, this is it. This is what I came for. The first 2 days were genuinely nice. We walked the Broadway Strip, and I bought myself a pair of boots I didn't need from a shop off Fifth. My son and I shared a plate of hot chicken at a place his coworker had recommended, and it was so spicy I had to press my napkin against my eyes while he laughed. And it was the kind of moment that I have kept in a small box in my chest ever since, because there weren't enough of them. The kids wanted to go to the Country Music Hall of Fame, and my daughter-in-law didn't want to stand in line. So my son took the kids, and she and I sat at a cafe across the street. We didn't have much to talk about. She scrolled her phone. I drank my coffee and watched people walk by and tried a couple of times to start a conversation. I asked about her sister, who just had a baby. I asked about the renovation they were doing on the house, and she answered, but not in the way that invites more questions. One sentence answers with her eyes still on the screen. I finished my coffee. I ordered a second one. I sat there and thought about the boots I'd bought and tried to feel like a person who was on vacation. By Memphis, something had shifted. I couldn't name exactly what or when, but I felt it the way you feel a change in weather before it actually comes. Something tighter in the air. Something that made me careful about how I moved. At dinner the second night in Memphis, we went to a barbecue place on Beale Street, the kind with red checkered tablecloths and the line out the door. I looked at the menu, and the pulled pork plate sounded right, but my daughter-in-law had already started ordering for everyone. She did it without looking up, without asking. 4 of the brisket combos. I don't really eat brisket. Something about the texture has never sat right with me. But I looked at my son and he was looking at his phone, so I didn't say anything. I ate around it. I ate the coleslaw and the beans and the cornbread, and it was good enough, and I told myself it was fine. After dinner, my son remembered he'd left the AAA card in the glove compartment of my car. And could I run and get it? The parking garage was just a block. I said, of course. I walked a block to the parking garage and up 2 flights and got the card and walked back. Nobody seemed to notice I'd gone. Nobody said thank you when I put the card on the table. The kids were fighting over the last piece of cornbread, and my daughter-in-law was saying, "You're giving me a headache, both of you." And my son was looking at his phone. I sat back down and folded my hands in my lap and looked at the red checkered tablecloth and thought, I paid for dinner. I had. My son had asked casually, "Mom, you want to get this one?" at the start of the meal. And I'd said, "Sure." And it had come out to just under $160 with tip, and I paid it without blinking because that's who I am. I've always been the one who covers things. That's not new. But walking back from the parking garage, getting the card that wasn't even for an emergency, putting it on the table in front of people who kept staring at their phones. Something small turned over in me. Not dramatically, just turned over. That night in the hotel, we'd booked 2 adjoining rooms, mine on one side, theirs on the other. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while before I turned on the lamp. I could hear them through the wall. My daughter-in-law's voice, not what she was saying, just the tone of it. Quick, efficient, managing. I thought about my husband. I thought about how when we traveled, he used to let me pick the restaurants because he said I had better instincts for a good meal, and how he'd carry everything, all the bags, and laugh when I told him he was overdoing it. I thought about New Orleans, which was still 3 days away. I thought about the beignets I was going to order at Café du Monde, which I had read about and clicked a photo of from a magazine 2 years ago and kept on my refrigerator. I turned on the lamp. I got out my book. I told myself tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow was not better. We drove from Memphis to New Orleans, my car again, me driving the whole way because my son said he was tired from work and his wife doesn't drive long stretches. And somewhere in Mississippi around hour 3, my daughter-in-law said from the passenger seat that she was hungry and we needed to stop. I said, of course, there was a rest area coming up. I'd seen a sign. She said she meant a real stop, a Cracker Barrel or something. I said there was one in about 20 miles. She said that was too far. I didn't say anything. I took the next exit and found a McDonald's, and everyone got out and ordered, and I ordered a coffee and a biscuit. And while we were standing waiting for the food, my daughter-in-law turned to me and said, "Did you bring snacks for the drive? I thought you said you'd handle snacks." I said I didn't remember saying that. She said, in the patient voice someone uses when they think you're being difficult, "You said it in the group text last Tuesday." I said I'd go back and check the group text. I did, on my phone, standing by the condiment station at the McDonald's. I scrolled back through the messages. I had not said I would handle snacks. What I had said was that I could pick up some things if anyone needed anything. That's different. That's an offer, not a commitment. But I didn't say that out loud. I put my phone back in my pocket and I went back to the table and I sat down. My son said, "You okay, Mom?" I said, "Fine." That's what being a mother is sometimes. You're not fine. You say fine. You've said it so many times it doesn't even feel like a lie anymore. New Orleans was the city I had imagined, and also not quite. The air was thick and sweet-smelling, that Gulf Coast heaviness that sits on your skin, and the buildings in the quarter were everything I'd pictured, wrought iron and wood shutters and window boxes spilling over with flowers. We checked into the hotel on St. Lartha's. Charles, a nice one, tall ceilings and a courtyard, and I stood for a moment in my room, looking at the ceiling fan turning slowly above the four-poster bed, and felt something like happiness, a preview of it. We went to Café du Monde the first evening. I'm my beanies. I want to tell you about the beignets because they were exactly as good as I'd hoped. Hot and light, powdered sugar rising off them in a cloud when you touched them. The coffee dark and chicory bitter. I ate 3 of them and didn't care about the sugar on my shirt. And my son laughed and took a photo of me looking delighted, and honestly, that photo, that single moment, was almost worth everything that came before it. Almost. By day 3 in New Orleans, the dynamic had settled into a shape I recognized. I was the one who stayed with the luggage while they went ahead. I was the one who waited in the car while they ran into the pharmacy. I was the one who fell behind on the walking tour because my knees had been unreliable since my late 50s, and nobody slowed down. I would round a corner and see them half a block ahead, my son's hand on his wife's back, the kids running, and I would walk faster, not quite catch up, and nobody looked back. On the 4th day, my daughter-in-law asked if I could watch the kids in the hotel room while she and my son went out for a couple of hours. A dinner, she said. Just the 2 of them. Alone time. I said, of course. They were gone for 4 hours. The kids ordered pay-per-view movies on my room's TV. I didn't know how to stop it once they'd started, and I sat in the chair in the corner and watched animated things I didn't understand and ate a granola bar from my purse because I hadn't had dinner. And when my son and his wife came back at 11:15, she said the kids should have been asleep 2 hours ago and looked at me as though that were my failure specifically. I said I'd tried. She said, you just have to be firm with them. My son kissed my cheek and said thanks, and they took the kids into their room, and I sat in my room in the dark again, and this time I didn't turn on the lamp for a long time. The morning it changed was the last full day. We were going to drive back to Nashville the next morning. I'd drive again and fly home from there, which meant they needed to repack, which meant the luggage needed consolidating, which meant my car's trunk needed rearranging. My daughter-in-law came out of the hotel with a bag in each hand and 2 more by the bellhop stand, and she said, without looking at me, "Can you get those? My back is bothering me." Her back had been mentioned a few times on the trip, usually when there was something to carry. I went to the bags. They were large ones, the kind with wheels, stuffed so full the zippers were straining. I got one moving and pulled it toward the car, and the wheel caught on a crack in the pavement and the bag tilted, and I grabbed it and felt something pull in my lower back. Not sharp, but present, a small warning. I stood up straight for a moment. My son was across the street getting coffee. He hadn't seen. My daughter-in-law was looking at her phone. I got the second bag. I loaded it into the trunk. I loaded the other ones. I closed the trunk and stood there with my hand on it and looked at my reflection in the rear window, a 68-year-old woman standing in the heat of a New Orleans morning after loading someone else's luggage. And I thought, why? Not with anger, just honestly, just why? Why am I here exactly? What role am I playing? Because it doesn't feel like grandmother. It doesn't feel like guest. It feels like a word I don't want to use about my own son's family. My son came back with the coffees. He handed me one. He said, all loaded up? Great. Hey, do you want to take the first stretch? I need to catch up on some emails. I took the coffee. I looked at him for a moment. He was already reaching for his phone. I said, actually, I need a minute. I walked away from the car, not far, just to a little bench outside the hotel entrance under an overhang. I sat down. I put my coffee on the bench beside me. I looked out at St. Charles Avenue and at the streetcar tracks running down the middle of it and at the Spanish moss in the oak trees. New Orleans in the morning is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I want to say that plainly. I want to remember it plainly, separate from everything else. A few minutes passed. My son came over and said they were ready when I was. I said, I'm going to stay. He said, What? I said, I'm going to stay a few more days. I've always wanted to see New Orleans, and I've barely seen it. He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, more like the recognition of something he'd been not quite looking at for the past 2 weeks. He said, Mom, we have flights. I said, I know, you should go. I'll drive myself home when I'm ready. My daughter-in-law had come up behind him. She said, What's happening? My son looked at me. I could see him deciding whether to push back or let it go. He is his father's son in some ways. There is a moment where he recognizes when something is settled and he stops arguing. He said, Okay. Just that. Okay. She said something under her breath that I didn't catch or chose not to catch. The kids came out of the hotel with the bellhop and my daughter-in-law went to deal with them. And my son stood in front of me for another moment. He said quietly, Are you mad at me? I thought about it. I really thought about it. I said, No, I'm just not ready to leave yet. He hugged me. It was the longest hug we'd had the whole trip. I patted his back the way I used to when he was small and had a nightmare and needed to know the world was still there. He said, I love you, Mum. I said, I love you too. Now go catch your flight. I watched the car pull away. My car, he was driving it. I'd said they needed it to get to the airport and I'd rent something small for myself. I watched my own car disappear around the corner and stood on the sidewalk with my one bag and my coffee and the New Orleans morning around me. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light. Not happy exactly, or not only happy, more like present, like I was actually inside my own life instead of moving through the edges of someone else's. I spent 4 more days. I went back to Café du Monde every morning. I took the streetcar out to the Garden District and walked until my knees asked me to stop, and then I sat on someone's front steps and looked at the houses. I went to a jazz club on Frenchman Street on my second night alone and sat at the bar, and a woman my age sat down next to me, and we talked for 2 hours about our husbands, both gone, both missed, and about cities we'd always wanted to see. And she was from Savannah, and she'd been coming to New Orleans alone every year for 6 years since her husband died, and she said, the first time is the hardest, after that it just feels like yours. I thought about that a lot. After that, it just feels like yours. I ate what I wanted. I slept when I was tired. I bought a small painting from a man set up outside Jackson Square. A street scene, just streetlights and wet pavement, and a figure walking away in the rain. And I wrapped it in a sweater in my bag and brought it home. And it's hanging in my hallway now, right across from the door. So it's the first thing I see when I come in. My son texted to ask if I'd gotten home safe. I said yes. He said the kids were asking about me. I said to give them my love. He said maybe we could plan something at Thanksgiving. Maybe, I said. I meant it as a real maybe. Not a kind one, not a dismissive one. A genuine maybe. I'll see how I feel. I'll see what I want. I am 68 years old and I drove myself home from New Orleans alone and I can probably figure out Thanksgiving. I've been thinking about what to call what happened on that trip. It wasn't a fight. Nobody yelled. Nobody said anything that can't be unsaid. My son doesn't know fully what those 2 weeks felt like from the inside, and I don't know if I'll tell him. Maybe I will. Maybe over the phone some quiet evening when I'm better at saying it than I am right now. What I know is this. I set down someone else's luggage and picked up my own, and that's not a small thing. It took me 68 years to figure out that I'm allowed to do that. My husband used to say I was too easy on people. He meant it affectionately. He was easy on people too. We were a matched set that way. But maybe what he was really saying, what I've been slowly understanding ever since, is that being easy on everyone else sometimes means being hard on yourself, and at some point the math stops adding up. I'm not angry at my son. I'm not even really angry at his wife. I am a little tired of being furniture in rooms I paid to be in, but that's something I can change. That's on me as much as anyone. What I am is awake, more awake than I've been in a while. The painting in my hallway, that figure walking away in the rain under the streetlights. I look at it every morning when I leave and every evening when I come home. And something about it makes me stand up straighter. I don't know why. Maybe because the figure is walking away and they look free. They're not running, they're not looking back. They're just walking, like they know where they're going, like they've already decided. That's what I want to feel like. That's what I'm working toward. You get to put the bags down. You get to say not yet. You get to stay in New Orleans 4 more days if you want to, even if the car is already running and everyone is waiting, and you've spent your whole life being the one who doesn't make people wait. You get to say, I'm not ready to leave, and mean it. I keep coming back to the luggage. Not as a metaphor, I mean the actual bags, the ones with the broken wheel and the straining zipper. The ones I loaded into my own trunk in the New Orleans heat while my daughter-in-law looked at her phone. I felt something pull in my lower back. I stood up straight, and I thought, how did I get here? That question isn't as simple as it sounds, because the honest answer is, I walked here. One small yes at a time. Yes, I'll pick them up from the airport. Yes, I'll get the cart. Yes, I'll run back to the parking garage. Yes, I'll watch the kids. Yes, I'll watch the kids. Yes, I'll take the first stretch of driving. Each one felt reasonable on its own. Each one felt like love, or like what I'd always understood love to look like. Showing up, making things easier, not making a fuss. I was raised to believe that's what good people do. And I still believe it, mostly. But somewhere between Cincinnati and New Orleans, I started to understand that doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, or doing it past the point where it's freely given, stops being generosity and starts being something else entirely. What I've learned, slowly and not without some pain, is that a clear mind is worth protecting. I spent 2 weeks telling myself things were fine when they weren't, smoothing over moments that deserved a real response. And what that cost me wasn't dignity so much as clarity. I couldn't see what was actually happening because I was too busy managing my own reaction to it. The woman I met at the bar on Frenchman Street, the one from Savannah who'd been coming to New Orleans alone for 6 years, she didn't talk to me about grand gestures or dramatic exits. She just said the city starts to feel like yours after a while. And I think what she meant was you have to actually show up for your own life, not the life that's convenient for everyone around you, yours. I'm not a person who believes in accident. I think the things that happen to us accumulate into something, and if we're paying attention, they point somewhere. The accumulation of those 2 weeks, the dinners I paid for without thanks, the driving I did without being asked, the evening I sat alone in a hotel room eating a granola bar while everyone else was out, all of that added up to a morning on St. Probler, Charles Avenue, where I finally got quiet enough to hear myself think. And what I thought was, I am allowed to want things. I am allowed to say, not yet. That took 68 years. I don't think I was weak for taking so long. I think the same quality that made me easy to take advantage of is also the quality that makes me someone worth knowing. I genuinely want the people I love to be comfortable. I genuinely don't keep score. But there's a version of that which is a strength and a version that's just fear dressed up as kindness. What I'm working on now is knowing the difference, showing up because I want to, not because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't. My son hugged me before he drove away. It was the realest moment of the whole trip. I think he knew something had shifted, even if neither of us named it. That hug felt like the beginning of something more honest between us. And I'd rather have that, even if it came at the cost of some hard days, than another 40 years of carrying bags that were never mine to carry.